All right, welcome everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to just keep our eye out for people joining. My name is Sven Masterson. I'm one of the Good Guys to Great Men certified coaches. And today I have with me my lovely wife, Zelda. We live in Central PA. That's the United States. We're right in the middle, about 4 hours from Rod, who's on the call with us today. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to have an unscripted conversation between us. Zelda knows really the title that you know, and really almost nothing else. So I hope you'll bear with us and appreciate her courage and boldness here, because I have no idea how this will go, and that's okay. We like to do that on our calls with you so that you can see just authentic relating between two people who have, come through the really hard stages of relationship that maybe you're finding yourself in. So we want that to be hopeful and encouragement to you, but also just to not have you feel like we're here to sell you something. We're here to just share kind of our journey with you, any perspectives that we've acquired along the way, in hopes that when you get off this call, you'll have some insight that might help you to weather whatever storm and challenge you're in. I would ask you, if you're on the call, to mute yourself, only because there's a lot of background noise, and maybe you don't know that it's happening, but everybody else hears it, and that'll just keep the conversation going pretty smoothly. If you're Yes, it is being recorded, and so I need to let you know it will be posted publicly to YouTube. A lot of people who want to come to this call might not be able to. We put it on our YouTube channel. And if you don't want your name or your face to be visible, I highly suggest that you either go off camera, although that would be a shame, or you change your name to something that is internet friendly, first name only, that kind of thing. Although hopefully nobody will critique you for being in a call about this subject. So what is that subject? Is there something in your wife's past, some form of brokenness, abuse? Hold on a minute, I gotta mute some people. Is there something in your wife's past that is really keeping your relationship from being a kind of relationship that you want? Now, Zelda, the reason I bring this up, hold on, I gotta mute more people. Please mute if you can, just to keep us on the right track. I talked about 15 to 20 guys a week, usually. And especially on new calls, almost every single time a man reaches out to me, one of the questions on my intake form is, what do you believe is keeping you from having this life that you want? And pretty much 98% of the men that respond have some sort of story about their wife's past that they feel like if she would just get healing in this, we could be okay, right? And it's usually some form of abuse, maybe some issues with parents, something that happened in childhood, some form of trauma, tragedy, etc. And if you guys don't mind, if you feel like you could be vulnerable enough here, just you could put your physical hand up. How many of you feel this way? And I know this can be a little embarrassing to say, man, my wife's got stuff going on. And so I invited Zelda here today to talk about this from a woman's perspective, because I did the same thing. And for 20 years, it was about 20 years, I think. Do you think that's fair, into our marriage before I started getting my head out of my ass a little bit? Maybe a little after 20 years, that doesn't really matter. But in hindsight, I found, man, just how much that viewpoint, it's not that I was entirely incorrect, but how much it hindered me. So yeah, I thought maybe we could just start by seeing, like, how does that even strike you? The whole idea that men feel this way, that they feel like, man, I want this relationship. I want passion and connection. A lot of women probably think men just want a bunch of sex, but I can promise you, the guys that we talk with, most of them, it's not about just physical intimacy. In fact, most of them kind of would rather have a deep emotional kind of intimacy with physical intimacy and are really quite disinterested in just mechanical sex, right? So that's the context here. How does that strike you?
Well, I don't think anybody wants to be viewed as being broken.
Yeah.
And definitely not to be pointed at as the cause for
You want something so bad?
the only cause.
Yeah.
Especially. I think most women, I'm going to speak for myself, want to be celebrated and want to be thought that when you chose me because of me, like, you know, everything that comes with that, not necessarily thinking that I'm a broken package.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel very nice.
So you don't want to feel like you're like a 1959 Chevy X whatever, you know, like, yeah, it's got a good frame and, you know, there's a lot of rust, but maybe we can get that worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. I could say for a number of years, you know, because obviously knowing you and knowing, you know, things that you shared with me as we were getting to know each other and then getting married and then newly married, I knew that you wanted to be a father from a young age, like you were passionate about that.
Yeah.
And so for a number of years, like my internal dialogue was, well, he got a lot of kids out of the deal. I would think at least that would make him happy.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we do. We have 6.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say like all 20 years were upsetting and a downer, but at times the seasons where I did feel that were difficult because I want it to be, how do you say, like, I wanted you to celebrate me and I wanted to be able to celebrate you and not have you feel like everything I did needed to be fixed.
Yeah.
Do you remember that season? Like, this just came to my mind. Can I share?
You can share whatever you want. I feel a little risky saying that, but yeah, I mean, really.
It's not bad. It's not grotesquely bad.
Yeah.
But there was a season where we were involved in like a committee. Like you and I were both on the committee. And it was kind of like a social planning committee.
Look at the student activity committee, that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, do you want me to go into those?
No, just
the student activity
students.
committee. We were after we were married, we went to school together. Anyway, after every single meeting, I'm crossing my arms now. I'm just coming back to me. After every single
Get your defensive body language on. That's good. Yeah.
You had like something to say about how I didn't say something correctly, how I said something wrong. Do you remember this? I mean, it's not like I'm dwelling on it for the last 20 some years. So don't think that. It's just coming back to me now that we're talking about the subject.
You're totally right.
And man, we were newly married that I remember thinking, seriously? I mean, aren't we supposed to still be in the honeymoon stage? Like, aren't we supposed to still be like swooning over me?
Yeah. And I have a perspective on why that was now. I totally agree. I was like this. And that didn't wear off quite so fast, did it? I have an idea why I was like this. I'm curious what on the other side of, because that was 28 years ago now, right? Just about.
Well, we're about to be 28 years married in December.
Yeah, so that
would have been like 27 years.
Okay. I'm curious if you have a perspective now. What do you think was going on in me? And you could be as direct as you want. I'm not going to hurt my feelings.
Because I haven't given it an ounce of thought.
That's why I'm asking you. That's why I'm asking you without thinking about it.
I guess I would think you must have had some insecurity going on that you had to have things look a certain way, right? And have to have your life look a certain way, and therefore my life as an extension of your life look a certain way, and then us together. Like, so we looked at this certain picture, whatever that was you had in your head. And so then it was coming from a sense of insecurity. Now, could I have said that then? Like, man, if you weren't so insecure, maybe you just lay off of me. No, I couldn't.
I wouldn't have been able to hear it, to be honest, but yeah,
that's what was going on. I just remember thinking, like, are you kidding me?
that is how I would answer it. Like now looking back, I know that my whole life, our whole lives, we're constantly experiencing our inner life. It's an interpretation of things going on constantly. And so without, it's all like subconscious. So, you know, you're feeling fear and anxiety. What is that instructor going to think? And you're dealing with all the insecurity of youth. And unfortunately, I carry that insecurity onward for at least another 20 years. But without knowing, I know I was trying to manage and control my environment to try to reduce risk, right? So it wasn't like I want everybody to think I'm all that in a bag of chips. It was more about feeling threatened, like that kind of insecurity, like unsafe, that if people misunderstood you, it would cause us conflict or you conflict. So a lot of it was born out of a really noble place. And that's one of the things I wanted to acknowledge with all of the men here too, is I believe we come into a relationship, and you guys, I'd like you to raise your hand if this resonates with you, with the desire to be the hero for y'all. Like we want to be heroes. I think in every man's heart is this desire. What does John Eldredge say in Wild at Heart? Like everybody has a battle to fight, a beauty to rescue. He says, like there's this yearning to show up really strong for a woman, and have her see you as the knight in shining armor, and to be able to just give of your strength in this like really profound and glorious way, right? And I think that's good. And I brought a little rescue hero along. I don't know if you guys have, if you have kids, I wonder if you've ever seen these before. This is pretty old now, but
the big feet.
yeah, it's this toy that we have 3 boys and 3 girls. And when our boys were little, they loved this toy, right? And if you've ever had sons, you probably have witnessed, like, it's like they pop out of the womb, and as soon as they could start talking and walking, they want to rescue something. And I know maybe that's not a popular view right now in culture, but you know, it's not like we sat around and bought our kids fire trucks and police stuff. They just seem to innately know they exist to have strength and to show up. So I want to affirm that. Like that's how I felt. Like I remember being a young man, and you're looking for a partner, and you don't think that they're broken, but I think part of the man's heart wants to feel like, can I be a hero in this person's life? And I'm just curious how that hits you. And you, if you guys feel that way, I'd love to know it too. But would that make you feel broken that a guy wants to be a hero?
I think there would be times in a woman's life where she would feel broken and want to get away from someone who maybe is being too overbearing as a hero. But then on the other hand, women are happy, you know, when a man comes through for her, right? Like if I am struck with a snake in my greenhouse,
that never happens.
Who am I going to call? I'm
Yeah.
going to call you, and you then are my hero, and I am then completely beholden to you and thankful for you and how you showed up in your strength. But if you were to,
I put the snakes there for that reason.
wanting to be quote unquote saving me because you think that there's something wrong with me,
Yeah,
then that's a different, like, that doesn't feel as good. Like that doesn't feel.
yeah. And I don't think most men, I doubt most men are walking around thinking there's something wrong with my wife. There's something wrong with my
Yeah.
wife. But here's what happens. You come into the relationship, and in your mind, you're this guy, and you're desiring just for this woman to notice your big muscles and your helpfulness and your eagerness to be her hero. And instead, what we recognize or what we run into is this, get away from me. Like, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, but we encounter what feels like adversarialness. And you remember how I used to say that a lot and it really pissed you off?
Yes.
That it felt like instead of accepting or appreciating what I was trying to be, that it got completely misunderstood,
Yeah.
right? So, and I have a few more things to say about that in a minute, but what was it like at that time? Like, what was going on with for you? Because what I recognize talking to men and knowing their story also is that, oh, I'm pretty sure you would say, well, I was trying to be a way that was pro husband, supportive, and I misunderstood it.
Mhm.
And I was hoping maybe you could talk about that, because there's that ships passing in the night thing that happens in marriage where I know I was relating to you from the limited understanding I had as a man, which is male. So, like Karen Brody says, or not Karen Brody, Allison Armstrong in that Queen's Code, how like a man's idea of a perfect woman is basically a man with female anatomy, and a woman's kind of ideal perception of a man as a hairy woman. Do you remember that part?
Right. I mean,
And
I don't remember that specifically, but I do remember her saying things like, "A man is not a misbehaving woman," meaning that women tend to think that men should be like
women.
women,
Yeah.
and then they get upset when they're not.
Yeah.
Man, I think the best thing is when people are finally like okay with who you are. When you can
Yourself, you mean?
when you can finally say, "I'm a woman, I'm afraid of snakes," or whatever, I'm not going to be the one to change the wax ring. You're going to do it. And then you're like, yeah, I'm the man. And of course, that's what everyone here is probably what we're all wanting, is like for everyone to walk in their true self. But then like, how do you get there? I guess is the point.
Well, and we'll get to that. I just, I'm most interested at the moment in just highlighting that part of the marriage journey is that you're being deeply misunderstood.
Yeah.
And like, I deeply misunderstood the way you would act as being adversarial to me.
Yeah.
And then I would act in a heroic way that I know my intentions were coming from that little boy, like, I want to show up strong, right? And then you go do something and a woman's just like, get away from me, or she's cold, and you shut part of your heart down.
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe you buy a gift that was like, it took you all the courage in the world to decide to buy this thing, and you kind of like, you can't wait to share it with you. And it's like, you kind of look at the look on your face is like, I'm not impressed.
I know,
right?
I feel bad about
Well,
times.
It's okay. The point is, that's normal in every marriage, but also that you are having those experiences too. I'm not trying to say that, I'm not trying to explain simply how males are, because I think you already know this, but I want the men on this call to hear like the other perspective, and to realize this goes both ways. Like, how did you think I needed to be fixed? And anything else in addition to insecurity? You can rattle it all off. It's fine. And how did those adversarial times feel like when I would
Do the lawyer or anything?
Oh, I didn't. Why, you're going to bring up lawyering? You're going to have to explain it now. Yeah, I'm sure nobody on this call does lawyering. Probably not any of them.
The lawyering thing to me was that if we ever had any kind of a difference of opinion, I never felt like I was actually heard, because he could come up with all of these different arguments that were really well thought out and could be so well articulated on the moment, like on the spot. And maybe that's the difference between a man and woman thing. Like a woman takes longer to think. I don't know, or at least for me. So like, I would feel like you're lawyering me out of like thinking what I think.
Yeah.
Even if what I'm thinking is wrong, at least let me think it.
That's a great statement. Yeah. Well, that's insecurity too. I ultimately came to understand there. And again, this is like, we don't realize we're doing this, but when you're in a relationship and you share a perspective, until you mature as a man, you're hearing it with your ego. And so your ego as a survival mechanism, it's trying to, it would normally be like your brain is trying to keep you safe from a train coming down the tracks or a lion jumping out of the bush. But it's really horrible at existential safety. And so when a woman says something that's different than your perspective, there's like this subconscious fear that if we're different, that woman might not love me. And if she doesn't love me, she might leave me. And if she leaves me, I might be alone. Like there's this whole like, and we're not conscious of this. It's just like we feel like, oh, I gotta fix that shit right now. Right. Like she can't think like that, or we're not gonna be close as a couple. Because you learn actually throughout life, if people disagree with you, it's dangerous. And maybe women don't, well, yeah, you probably encounter this, but for like little boys, how many have ever got your ass kicked or just gotten conflicts on the schoolyard because you liked a different sports team or you were a Chevy guy instead of a Ford guy? Like this starts happening to us young. And so we learn to go along to get along. Then you get married and you pretty much marry somebody who's not going to go along to get along at all. In fact, it's going to be opposite, right?
Yeah.
I've come to appreciate the oppositeness now, but it was scary as shit when we were young because it made me feel threatened that you might have a totally different point of view, but also sometimes just hindered. You know, like if I wanted to do something or not do something and you're different, it's like, how much time is this going to take to like, you know, to make a decision or get through? I didn't appreciate those things.
Yeah.
But how were they for you?
Yeah. Wait, which things?
Just
Because I feel like you've asked me two questions.
okay.
now.
Say whatever you
I
want to
didn't
say
actually
now.
Answer the first one. I can't remember what it
Share
was
whatever
now.
you want to share.
Well, thinking about, there was a season of our life that came to my mind as you were talking, where back to when you were saying that you would say that everything I did was adversarial to you. So that season of life that I'm thinking of was about between like 3 years and 6 years of marriage. We were living in a teeny tiny apartment, and it felt like anytime I wanted to just share a frustration with you, you felt like that was an attack
I did, yeah.
to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, you would then say things to me that weren't kind and loving or supporting. And I couldn't have said it then, but I remember years later, we were in a different house, like at that house. Did I say this part? We're in a teeny tiny upstairs apartment. It was like some of the darkest 3 years of our life.
Yes.
So then we're in our other house, you know, our actual house years later. And I remember finally coming to a realization of like, if you could just let me share with you and just hear what I'm saying, but don't feel like you have to have a response or that you have to fix it. And maybe even, I don't know if I said this part, like just give me a hug, that it would just make things so much easier, right? So back to those 3 dark years, you probably felt like you were doing everything that you could do to be, you know, a man and provide and be the hero in our life at the moment, which was a difficult season. And I'm thinking, well, I'm doing everything I can, even though this life is not what I had dreamed of. It's not the plan that we had, which was to work together. Like that's what I was hung up on, was like, we got married to work together. And now here I am at home taking care of a baby, turned into a toddler. And then another baby came along in that little apartment. And so then I'm like, okay, well, I'll just do the best I can do at like making sure that little apartment is spick and span and clean and meals are made and the children are taken care of. And then, you know, that is a frustrating season for a woman to be in, that any woman, but me especially, not necessarily setting out to live that life. And some women do. Like I met a woman in MOPS, all she wanted to do was be a wife and a mother. Like she went to three days of college and said, this isn't for me, and just wanted to be a wife and mother.
I'm sure she's never been frustrated since.
That wasn't the life I was setting out to lead. Anyway, so I'm thinking of that as an example of you being misunderstood by me and me being misunderstood by you, and we were never getting here. We were always.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something about like how you just wanted to be able to say to me, let me let somebody in here. You wanted to be able to say to me how you're feeling and your perspective, and then have me just hear it, not respond, and actually give you a hug. I laughed when you said that, because what a man hears is, I'm unhappy, our life sucks, you don't do enough, you don't earn enough, the house isn't big enough, and like a host of other things. There, don't say anything and give me a hug, right? So that's how it feels as a man.
But I think I was saying that, like,
That's my point.
I swear, in our entire time of being married, I have never looked at you and thought you're not doing enough. You're not providing enough. If for some reason we haven't had enough, and there have been times where we haven't, I've just thought, that's
Yeah.
just the way of it. It's not you.
Yeah.
You're not falling down on the job any more than I would want you to look at me and say, oh, that child's diaper hasn't been changed in an hour. You're falling down the job. I don't want you to look at me like that. Right.
Right. And that's what happens, isn't it?
There
Like,
were times where not necessarily the diaper thing, but where you thought I was falling down the job in the mothering department, which that's my full-time job.
yeah. And this is what I wanted to point out is like, you weren't, I'm so glad you said that. You weren't sitting there thinking you're a terrible husband and provider.
Mhm.
You're just saying, this is how I'm feeling. And this is what men do not get. It's very hard to learn. Are you sure that's not about me? It sure feels like it's about me. It really feels like you're actually taking a shot into my jugular or kicking me in the nuts right there. But you're telling me you don't, and you want a hug, and I'm having a hard time with this. So, but then again, like I know too, like if I came home, maybe I saw something out of sorts in a house. This happens to a lot of guys with stay-at-home spouses, right? Maybe they notice that like something is a wreck or the laundry's piled up, and they're not necessarily thinking, I have a terrible wife, I have a terrible homemaker. They're just thinking, oh, that pile of laundry is irritating. So they say, hey, what's up with the laundry? And they might actually be thinking to themselves, do you need some hero energy here? And how do you hear it?
As I've fallen down on the job.
Yeah. Now, why might that
So
be?
I'm constantly trying to do things to make sure I always look like I'm ahead of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, not now.
Right.
Now, if I feel like I'm tired and I need to sit down and take a break and watch a gardening show, I do. But in our early years, if I did that, I thought I was failing.
Yeah, I got you.
And I would think that you would find something inadequate about me.
I was just going to mention that word. I was going to say, it's been my experience from knowing you, but also just women I've known in my lifetime, our daughters, my mother, relatives, that it's that a woman's deepest insecurity is that she's inadequate.
Right. So if you circle that back around to the beginning of
That's
this
what I wanted to do. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
of my wife is broken, my wife is inadequate.
So if I show up and just say, honey,
I might as well just crawl under the table.
I don't like my life. I wish I had more intimacy and just deeper connection. And if you would just go to therapy, I think it would work. What do you think that would ding inside of you?
Complete and utter failure. And now that you brought that up, I do recall you saying that to me one time in relation to one of our children, how he and I were relating to each other. You came and you said, you need to get help. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah.
And I thought, I might as well just throw it all in now, because to me, I'm literally every waking hour giving. I'm probably going to start crying about thinking about this. Like
okay.
Giving to doing a good job.
Yeah.
As a wife and a mother. And now you're going to tell me I need to go get help for this? For like what?
What would you
My
want?
opinion was like a bump in the road. Like when you have children, you have bumps in the road, right? But you don't constantly look at them and say, you need to go get help. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's where I was.
You love them and you encourage them and you hug them.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, what would have been more effective in that moment? And just to give some context, I am familiar with that. And now I talk to a lot of men about this. There's a thing that happens with a lot of men when especially when your kids are little. And this gets talked about a fair amount, and I'm sure maybe one or two guys here will relate to this. Maybe it looks like the kids are in danger, right? Not necessarily physically, but they look like they're suffering emotional harm. And so there's this protector instinct that happens with men, I think, that what you see what looks like something going on with like way too rough energetically, right? Because so picture like a lion and a lioness, and the lioness is not just roaring at the cubs, but she's just biting their necks a little bit and they're yelping. And you're like, I think I got to step in here, right? And so then at least a man's nature, you tell me, fellas, is to you just roar, like you want to tell her like, hey, back the F off, right? And but I've also learned it's completely ineffective. How would have been a better way to be in that moment? And do you need me to actually police your insides like that? Is that even effective?
Well, let me start with saying this, that if a mother is, obviously going way too far and actually causing abuse to a child, then definitely a husband and father needs to do whatever possible. But I know from a fact that that's not what's happening with our children.
Yeah, I just saw about the instinct
They
there.
were safe, they were loved. And if there were conflicts between us, it all kind of
It worked out.
worked
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
So I wasn't necessarily bringing this up to bring up the whole children point of view, but now I forgot the second question.
Well, just like,
what should you have done?
not
Give it
should, I
breaks.
didn't know differently, but all these guys, we're looking for perspective and understanding. Like, if I just jump in there and I just like, you go to your corner and I swoop the kids away because in my mind, I'm worried about them. Does it actually lead you to a healthy place? And is there a better way to be that I could have been in those moments than like shaming and accusatory, or shame on you for like, for being harsh or whatever?
Yeah, I think like being just more understanding and talking outside, like away from the children's ears, so that one, the parental is not undermined.
Yeah.
Because I felt like there were times where you did that lawyering thing to them when they got older. And I would sit there going, I don't know, like, should I jump in? Because he's doing that lawyering thing and they're never going to win. But yeah, I didn't want to undermine you.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I didn't want to undermine you as the authority. So I kind of just.
But I was being, I call that perspective dominance, when you're like, you have to make somebody, you have to bury their perspective under yours. And it is insecurity.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do it. I did do it to kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Like breaks is what I said. Back then. I just needed more breaks. Like more breaks. You
mean from those moments?
Let me take the children and you go for a walk. Or
oh, right. Yeah, I didn't do that very well.
Let me take them to their lesson or whatever. Let me deal with this and you go do this kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
I feel like would have helped. And yeah, giving a male perspective. Had you done it without one outside of their ears, and two from like, I understand you're doing the best you can do, but let me give you this other perspective. Because I feel like I was completely open to wanting to hear the male perspective, especially as we're raising boys. And I grew up in a family of all girls. And, so I didn't know the male mind,
Yeah.
And sometimes the male mind would freak me out. Like when you talked about, boys wanting to like show their heroic side of them. It made me think of this example that we started out with, like no guns, like no play guns or anything. And when our oldest was 2.5 or 3 years old, he started like biting his pretzels into the shape of a gun. He like would take his napkin and crumple it up and like turn it like this and go bang, bang, bang. Well, he hadn't seen anyone doing that. It was just like, as later on in my mothering and learning more about the male mind, I started to see like that was just one little bit of it coming out of him wanting to have a battle to fight. And so then when I started to embrace that in them, I would have newer moms come with younger boys and they would be a little bit like, when they would come to our house and their son, who had never played with guns, was like playing with guns and whatnot, and seeing the joy on their face, they were like, what kind of thing, and they then had to have that kind of awakening that there's something in a male that has to fight, like it's a battle to fight.
Well, fight for, yeah.
Fight
It's
for.
not just, it's not a violent instinct.
No,
it's
not just violent, not just being violent.
Yeah, it's that, men want to be used up in the service of something great. Like,
Yeah.
and if a beauty is involved in that, all the better. And that is an energy we come into marriage with, and it can, it's a good thing, but like you said, you didn't understand it. I'm not so sure I understood it very well back then because of insecurity.
Yeah. And so I think a woman like loves that about a man, in the sense of wanting to be swept off her feet, and but not like because there's something wrong with you, but because you're wonderful. Do
You
see
mean
the
that's what you
difference?
want me to see? Yeah.
Like, I want you to be a hero in my life because you think I'm wonderful.
yeah, it's that celebrated thing that you said before.
Celebrated, yeah.
Okay.
Not be a hero because you think I'm broken,
Yeah.
if
Well,
that makes any sense.
it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. There's let me check the questions real quick here, see if we have anything.
Someone's raising their hand.
Jeff, go ahead and unmute yourself, and then we'll hear what you have to say.
All right, thanks. First of all, I want to say to both of you, thank you so much, because there's a lot of what you've been saying. It's been really clear.
Good.
And points out an awful lot of things that I've experienced in my life as well. A couple of things, and then I wanted to ask Zelda, then I want to ask you two questions, if I may, after. I find in my life that the thing that seems to come between me and understanding my wife and working with my wife when I'm invited to are unmet needs. So I may have unmet needs, yeah. So I may have expectations that she's going to give me something that I need. That's not a good way of approaching a relationship in my mind, to have that. What I've realized a lot is that my unmet needs are my responsibility. And I have to internalize the process, because I'm going to get those needs met internally, right? If it's a glass of water, I can go to the faucet. But if it's feeling loved and acknowledged, which I didn't receive a lot of, I don't think a lot of us do. I don't think we ever receive all that we need. It's about becoming self-realized and recognizing and feeling those feelings, not intellectualizing them and saying, oh yeah, if I imagine a glass of water, imagine drinking it, then I've quenched my thirst. You have to actually drink water. And the feelings that reconcile me with my unmet needs are feelings that come from within me. And the process I've learned to work with is meditation, which takes me directly to those feelings. So then the question I have, Zelda, I have a two-part question, if I may. The first part is, your trauma that you work with, and I think we all have trauma, but the trauma that you work with, have you been working on that? Whatever it is, and you don't have to say, obviously, you're not going to. I don't think you should say what they are, but that your trauma that affects your relationship with Sven, have you been working on it? And the second part would be, have you found a way of working on it that doesn't re-traumatize you?
Yeah, those are good questions. And yeah, I'll say I can point to 3 different seasons where I was working on trauma exclusively. Well, the first one, maybe not exclusively, because I was 8 years old. So I was put into a therapy group when I was 8 years old with other little 8-year-olds to get over, quote unquote, get over some trauma from prior to 8. And then in college, I had some therapy for about a year, I think, until she was a sweet lady, until she finally said, I really think there's not much more to talk about. And I remember actually going to my mom and saying, I'm done, I'm healed, kind of thing. And her thinking like I still needed help. And we started dating during that season of life.
Yeah.
And then again, in 2013,
Like during our war years.
the beginning of 2013, I sought out some help from someone that we had known as young people that I knew, you know, she was a psychologist. So I sought her out and I met with her for 3 years. So as far as trauma that occurred to me, some of the trauma that occurred to me as a child, I would say I don't identify with it with that anymore. Like I was saying that, in my 20s and my 30s, and maybe even in my early 40s, I would have thought like, I'm still a, whatever you call that title of a person who dealt with things like that. But I don't even identify with that. The one bit of trauma that I still, if I were to say I'm going to struggle with something, and I don't mind saying it, is that my biological father stopped relating to me when I was 8 years old. And I didn't see him again until I was 22, right before we got married. And then we had a very kind of on and off relationship until he died. And he died in 2019, July of 2019. And I wasn't invited to the funeral, and I wasn't included in the obituary. And I remember when it happened, Sven saying, well, how do you feel now? Like, how do you feel about it now, a couple weeks later? And I said, well, in a way, it's a little bit freeing, because now I know, nothing's going to change. He's never going to reconcile that relationship the way that I'd hoped he was going to. I held out hope that there'd be reconciliation throughout my entire life. And okay, so now I can give that up. But I find myself in July still like, and I mean, maybe Sven could say something different about how he saw me relate to him in relation to that kind of a daddy-ish, I guess you could say, if you're gonna label it. But I would have said, from my point of view, I was never trying to have Sven in any way, shape, or form replace anything that I was missing because of that. Do you know what I mean? And there was very, very, very few times where he brought it up in anger, but there's one time that I can think of where he said, how long am I going to be, I forget the word
Like
now,
paying for the
punished
sins of
for
your,
the sin
yeah.
of him. And then my adopted father, who was a good dad, but, had his weaknesses also. And I remember being taken aback, like, what? Are you kidding me? I don't feel like I've ever put that on you, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? But that's my perspective.
So
that might not be your perspective.
no, I'm glad you brought this up, because it's kind of what I want to talk about in general. And Jeff, thank you for your question. It's a great question.
Thanks, Zelda.
Sure.
There's this there's a tendency that we have. So what I want you to notice is, well, let me ask you one question first. Did any of that impact our intimacy?
Our physical intimacy, or
Intimacy, just intimacy in general together. Do you feel like any of the stuff with your biological father, or even stuff from childhood, was ever impacting our intimate life? Just our closeness with one another.
I never felt like it did.
Okay.
But again, that's my perspective.
No, this is what I want to.
I remember someone saying to me, like, during a time where it was a hard time with you, and I don't talk about sex with people, okay, but this one friend did ask me, are you and your husband still? And I'm like, yeah, we have a problem. I was like, we have a lot of kids to show for, but
Yeah.
So I always felt like, even through our hard times, and with quote unquote past hurts on my part, and you had past hurts too.
That's a thing I want to talk
that
about
I
here
never
shortly.
felt like that affected wanting to be close to you.
Well, so here's what I've
makes sense.
come to see, and actually first in our relationship, but then in the hundreds of men I've met with and helped, is that our brains have this tendency to connect dots, right? And so in my hubris, it was like, well, I don't have the life I want. And, oh, it must be this is related to that, right? And it's kind of the way the brain is. You look for explanation of things, and what you use to create your explanations is the cache of experiences in the past and understanding that you have, which themselves are just interpretations. So I would kind of go through life looking at, like, well, it must be that. That must be the reason. And this is what I'm saying men do. Like, men are reaching out because they're not experiencing the life they want. And really the problem is something Jeff mentioned, which is that they have a need and expectation that they believe the solution is in her change. How does that feel to believe that a man believes the solution to everything that ails him is in you? Does that inspire intimacy and connection?
No, and it's funny you say that because I wouldn't be able to point back to what year, but I remember there was a time where I felt like whatever was going on was too much for my slim shoulders. And I'm saying that figuratively and literally, like I don't have very big shoulders. That's a lot. That would be a lot for a woman to have to take on. I feel like
here's my unhappiness. Can you please fix it?
Completely weighed down upon. And if I could say this from a mother's point of view, I would be like, are you kidding me? Not like one more person that I've got to make sure their life is going well for.
Right. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up. If I have triggered that mothering kind of response in you, and I'm simultaneously saying, why don't we have more sex? Okay. Tell us about that. Like,
that's not, no one's going to want to do that. Like,
not a good aphrodisiac.
No.
Okay.
I don't want to mother you.
Yeah.
And when I see that in other people's relationships, I'm like,
a little creepy.
One, it's creepy. It's like, you got to look at them and go, you're not, like, your intimate life is not happening probably as far as physically goes.
That's very, very good.
Like, it's just, it's creepy.
Okay.
No woman wants to be a mothering figure, no more than a man wants to be a fathering figure.
Well,
I would assume.
You don't assume incorrectly, but I think part of the way human beings live is we find dysfunctional ways to find value. And I do think that a soul that wants to find value and notice from another person will do anything, like, so I do think some people actually are it's not they're happy to be the daddy role, but they probably have some daddy energy because it's better than no female attention. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I agree with you though. I don't want to feel like your dad. And I do think one thing I've had to learn as a man, and it kind of is related to what we're talking about, is, I could be your therapist or I could be your lover. I could be your father or I could be your lover, right? Like, the more I'm trying to be these other roles, your fixer, your healer, the more I'm actually taking myself out of the spot where there would be a desire for romantic connection.
Right.
So I've come to see that as like, but also just trusting that you have the innate wisdom to, if there's something you need to attend to in yourself, that's yours. You know what I mean? Like that was really hard for me to learn because of that desire to be a hero and a protector. You see somebody in your life suffering, you see a woman, and men want to fix anyway. And you're like, I want to do something. And I know that's born out of a good place, but I've really had to learn to say, well, that's also can be a little arrogant, or a lot arrogant in my case, right? And it's been more helpful for me to just let you be. And that's the first thing I promised, 3 perspectives that I've encountered anyway to these men in the call outline that I have routinely seen turn things around for men. And the first one is to turn that hero energy inward. And this kind of goes to Jeff's point. A lot of time, if I could summarize how I viewed things in the past, it wasn't that you were broken, but I wanted to be your hero before I was ever my own hero. And that's like trying to go out and do the work of a Navy SEAL with no training to be a Navy SEAL. It's like, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to rescue this person, and I haven't done a lick of anything yet to figure out my own insides. I don't know how to self-source anything. I'm not self-reliant. I don't own myself. And yet it's like I jump right into the hero role.
Yeah. And
just like that would be ineffective to try to run into a burning building without, knowing what a firefighter would know. you're probably going to have a less chance of actually achieving the heroism, right, than you would have if you just trained for it. And so that first point is, yeah, turn that hero attention first inward, realizing it's really a good and noble thing that we have, that we want to be in this role, because I've needed this later on, and it will kind of fold into the second point.
And to speak to that, though, that was really the turning point in our marriage, is when you did that for yourself. You know, when you said, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get myself right with myself.
But I
Or
didn't
how you
see
would
that
word
for
it,
20
but-
years. Like I thought, and this is one of the dangers, I guess, you know, it's ego, it's hubris, lots of people, including you, told me I was a great man. So I believed it. It was
Well,
like,
you still are. You always were a great man.
well, yeah, but there's a point where it's just blindness. Like, you know, maybe it's a lack of the right quality of men in my life saying, yeah, you are a great man, but you know, you did this one thing and it's really effing annoying. Like I probably needed somebody like that. I needed more Lonnies in my life, because Lonnie would tell
he
me
here?
that. Lonnie's there, yeah.
Hey.
So, but I didn't have that. I just held people telling me this, and I'm like, what is the problem here? You know, I'm running into just maleness. I'm
Yeah.
running into resistance. I'm encountering this idea that, you know, the brain saying, well, this plus this is that. That's why you're unhappy, right? And I really, the theme was blame. And so kind of one of my second point was just the thing that, you know, after self-sourcing things and becoming your own hero, the number two thing I've seen be essential for men to restore a relationship is entirely releasing judgment on the other person. And this can be complicated because you might say, well, they do have a traumatic past. I know, right? Like I'm not unaware of your past, but there's a point where I had to stop judging you in any way. It was like, well, you know, that is not in any way helpful. Like any form of blame, I have learned, is actually a failure to own my insides. That's been really hard. It's been hard to come to. But that release of judgment of every kind, I think, has been really healing in our relationship. I'm just wondering, again, we haven't talked about this. How does that feel? Do you feel judged? And I'm taking a big risk asking you in public if you feel judged, because I have a perception of how I'm doing this, but you might totally blow me out of the water here, and that's okay. But do you see that as necessary to heal a relationship?
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely have felt, because I would say, you know, was it 2019, I guess,
18.
when I felt like the turnaround was starting in our life, and I can just, it's been like a sense of freedom, a sense of freedom to just be myself and to not feel judged, to not feel condemned if maybe I'm thinking something like, okay, can I use this as an
You
example?
can use anything you want.
Okay, so there was a time where I couldn't even say like anything unkind about anyone. Okay, now I'm not going to say
Yes.
I think it's all right for people to like be bashing other people. I'm not saying that, but in our personal life, right? Like if you see something in someone, you should be able to share that with the person with whom you're closest to, and just like go, oh, can you believe that person? Or, oh, can you believe that house?
That
Or
lady looked
whatever.
hideous in that dress,
Yeah,
that
she
kind of
looked
thing.
terrible in that outfit. And just to be able to say it, not really for any other reason, just other than just say it.
Yeah.
And he would always be like, oh, well, that's not a very nice thing to talk about. Or if let's say, if I said, oh my gosh, can you believe that yard? It's like looks like Sanford and Son, because they are not taking care of their property. And you would say, do you remember? It's home to someone.
Yeah.
Which immediately was like,
Well,
I don't want to be judged just for my thinking. But
that's what I meant by
ever
release
since
of
you got
judgment.
rid of that, about even those are just small examples that I gave, but I've seen it in the bigger picture of just me as a person.
Yeah.
Man, what a difference.
Well,
made
you
as
remember
far
how
as
I
being
said-
light and carefree, and then just being able to have a lightness in relating.
You remember how I said, I can't be your therapist, can't be your dad. That would be like, I can't be your character development coach. I can't be your spiritual advisor. And again, I'll just feel my own insecurity.
Yeah.
Like, what are people going to think about her and us by proxy if you have these attributes of like, judging people for shit in their yard, right? But again, it was one of those things I had to let go, and it was related to that idea of judgment. Just like, stop judging the woman, right? Like, let her say whatever. And I really had to learn that I can have my perspective, and I need to hold on to my perspective, but my perspective is for me. This is the whole idea of these two things work together. You have to turn that desire to lead and be a hero to self, right? If I don't want to critique my neighbor for having stuff in their yard, awesome. But the moment I try to tell someone else how they should live that way, I am actually judging, and I'm eroding intimacy. Because if I'm judging you all like that, you're not going to be like, yeah, let's go cuddle tonight, or let's spend time together. And what would you do?
I would just want to go do my own thing,
Yeah,
just like
right.
eschew you.
And then we had those seasons, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not like men don't know what this is like. We don't like to be judged either. And when we feel judged, that's what happens to us. When I would do a carpentry job, and it's a 1,000-hour job, and you walk in and you see the one thing, the millimeter scratch that I missed, right?
I feel bad about this.
Well, it's okay. I want to just explain that we have this too. Then we're like, WTF, I just did a 1,000-hour DIY project for you,
Yeah.
and you found the 1 millimeter that I skipped,
Mhm.
right? And it's not like I'm thinking, let's go make love in that moment. It's like, get away from me. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to see you for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So it's not like men don't understand this, because we experience the same thing. With judgment, I'll just throw this number 3 out thing here. Then I want to take George's question. Is radical acceptance, and it's related to judgment, because I think you have to, like, hand in hand. You can't release judgment on a person until you just accept that who they are right now is who they are. And this is a really confusing topic to talk to a lot of people about, because most people mistake acceptance for approval. But this is how I was able and am able to live in this way, is that I don't have to approve of what words are coming out of your mouth. Like, maybe I find them distasteful at times to say that lady looked fat in a dress or something, right? But I can accept that that's who you are this moment, and that judging you and believing you should be any different than that in that moment gets me nothing. Like, it doesn't do anything for us to build closeness and intimacy.
Mhm.
And so this idea of radical acceptance, and that starts inward. So all these things are related. Like, I had to really learn to radically accept me, which meant, like, own it. Like, if I don't like that, own it, right? But also do that by carefully managing the tension with, I'm not going to yield my perspective to somebody else, but I also cannot insist that other people see life like me. I have to just accept that's who they are, like, whether I like it or not. I don't have to approve it, but I can accept it. And so this turning the hero energy inward, number 1, releasing judgment, and radically accepting, I would say, are like 3 pivotal things to get you past the disillusionment and power struggle stage of marriage. And it's not just in ours, but in the guys in our community and the clients I have who have gone onward and restored sometimes decades long no intimacy marriages, sometimes years, or people that were getting divorced, separated. It was those 3 things, and kind of the behind the scenes attributes that I wrote about recently in The Good Guys, Great Men, ownership, self-reliance, which Jeff actually pointed out brotherhood, this thing we call unconditional high regard, which was all about like holding on to seeing you as your essential self, despite what your behavior was in any one moment.
Mhm. And I think I had to have the acceptance for myself also, because for all the years that I was saying you were a good man, and I really did think you were a good man, there was a part of me that was wanting to always be pleasing to you. And maybe there were things that I necessarily wouldn't do on my own volition, but I'm willing to do because one, I want to be pleasing you, and two, because I think as the man you are, the leader in our family. And so I would throw out the example of living on a homestead. Like,
Yeah.
I have absolutely no interest in living on a homestead.
Still,
But we're on a homestead. And so for the first while, maybe I was trying to, even with that, wanting to not be true to myself. And so when I was finally able, during those 3 years that I mentioned, started in 2013, of completely accepting myself for myself and not wanting to like change or try, well, this isn't really me, but okay, I'll give it a try. And I'll just use this as an example of like taking care of animals. I'm not an animal person. And when I finally said I'm not taking care of animals, that's being true to myself, like true acceptance for myself. And then I feel like then as you were able to have true acceptance for yourself, and then you're accepting me, then I'm able to accept you. So it's like, just it's cyclical.
Yeah. So
Does that
one
make any
question,
sense?
it does. And it made me think of a question right away, which is what are the optimum conditions for you to accept you, to radically accept you? And what are the conditions that make that hard in marriage?
I'd have to think. What are the optimum conditions to
I could ask it
accept
another
me?
this way. If I'm not accepting you, how is it going to be more or less challenging to accept yourself?
Definitely for me as a pleaser, and I don't know, I cannot speak for all women. All women aren't all exactly the same.
Yeah.
But for me, as being a firstborn, wanting to be right all the time, pleaser kind of person, then yeah, I would say if you weren't accepting me, then that would be it would have been impossible to accept myself. But what happened for me in 2013 was when I finally said, forget everything. And I said,
Use a different F word though.
Word.
Yeah.
I was like, forget you, forget them, forget the world, forget everyone around here. And just was like,
that was a breaking point. And
that was a breaking point for me.
Just for everybody who doesn't know that story, we didn't get divorced, but I feel like in a lot of ways we were living as separated, divorced people in the same house, because you just were like, you weren't going to focus on anything at all. And a lot of women experience that. You didn't say this, but I think you probably wanted to, which was, I need to find myself. This is the I need to find myself. My whole life has been about other people for way too long, and that's got to stop today. Well, that sigh was telling.
Dreams of like getting in my car and driving away. And I actually laughed our 20th anniversary in hindsight, because you got me a car. You got me a car for our 20th anniversary, and that was in 2014. So we weren't happy yet.
You were still
happy with each other again.
You were a flight risk back then.
I was still in my counseling session, and I dreamed literally about getting in the car. So a number of years later, I laughed to myself so hard that here I would picture just what it would be like to get in the car and drive away from everything. Now that probably sounds really terrible, telling I'm a mother, like that I would dream about leaving my children.
But what would make you dream that? That's important.
You got me that car, and I was like, he just gave me the ammunition I needed, or like and I could have so easily just gotten in that car.
We'll see if you get one at 30 years.
Okay, what was the question?
What would have made you want to do that at the time?
Just complete and utter overwhelming desolation. This is it. I mean, at the moment, mind you, we are self-employed. As far as we are self-employed, I homeschool, so our kids don't go to school here. We don't have any relatives here. We had made a lot of choices. So there's like, it was pretty much, to me, it was like the perfect storm of postpartum depression, unhappy marriage, difficulty in motherhood. Because
We had
at
a
the
baby in
moment, I
there.
had a teenager, a preteen, an elementary school, a toddler, and a baby.
You had a milestone birthday.
Milestone.
You lost a father.
Yeah.
And we had a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like pretty much everything.
That's all. So all of that. I mean, because as being, you know, a firstborn pleaser, hold it all together, I've been able to do that for all of my life. But at that moment, it was like,
yeah, it was
I
definitely.
can't do it anymore, and I could get in the car and drive away. And I can picture a journal entry that I made of like, why do I feel this? Because I actually do love my husband, you know, even though we weren't seeming like we loved each other. I do love my children. I would not want to leave my children, but if I could, I would.
But you
So,
also had to be authentic to yourself, and that's the hard. And I had the similar season where you would have loved for me to be different, but I had to experience that chapter of my life in a way that was congruent
Yeah.
with my insides. And I felt like,
yeah,
I'm sorry, I can't live this next phase the way you want me to.
yeah,
But to do that, I would be completely somebody else.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
So I'm just saying it was during that time where I found acceptance for myself, truly for me,
Yeah.
who I am, that I didn't care if you didn't accept me. But then when you accepted yourself and then started to accept me, then I could accept you.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of acceptance going on.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted to kind of point to, because that's a prerequisite to enter that fourth stage of marriage, which is actually called the acceptance stage in some circles, because until both parties can accept themselves and each other, you don't have a basis for that. And interestingly, I would say that becomes, it's the fact that you found acceptance that becomes the bedrock for intimacy later, meaning for guys anyway, you've longed about this kind of depth in your intimacy, not just physical, but just in general, just the enjoyment, mutual enjoyment of one another, that it's having gone through, for me, the pain and chosen each other anyway, which is like what creates the foundation for that.
Right.
Like I couldn't go out and just like find somebody new and experience that
Yeah,
ever,
right.
because you haven't hurt that person to the degree where for them to accept you is a momentous occasion.
Yeah.
Like to accept one another in with that level of like overcoming is what creates the beauty of the later stages of marriage.
Yeah,
right?
which is what I was just thinking. The beauty, like that's what came into my head, is
Right.
like the beauty of that. You get to experience, which you wouldn't if you just, you like, what's the term you use, scuttle the ship?
Right.
If you had scuttled the ship, we wouldn't be able to enjoy that beauty, because, you know, then you're starting over with someone that, you know, didn't go to your high school prom and have a messed up hairdo, or, you know, didn't go through the failures of early 20s and know what that feels like and can talk about that and laugh about it and whatnot. You know what I mean?
Well, and
so,
who hasn't
that
really
history, I
accepted,
guess. Yeah.
they accept what they know of you, but they haven't accepted 30 years of you.
Right.
And so it's like you're earning a certain amount of street cred with one another all that time. That is the basis of that intimacy.
Yeah, but beauty is a good word to use.
Yeah. I say to guys on calls all the time, you know, if I could fly them to the top of Everest and we stepped out of a helicopter, we would both die. And if we didn't die, it would not really be the same experience as taking months to climb Everest, because you become the person who can stand on the summit of Everest on the climb up.
Oh, no.
And in marriage, you become the person who can have the intimacy you want through the long, protracted, painful part of marriage. And yet we have this kind of ego-driven, I need to stay away from pain. I need to stay away from discomfort. I need to stay away from difficulty. And so we keep looking for and longing for and running from the adversity that's actually creating the thing that you want, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of people bail out. Not that you should stay in every situation, just that I'm glad I did, because what I wanted was there all along. I just didn't recognize the seasons we were in as actually producing that. And that was kind of the big, mind-blowing piece. So let me stop and ask George to ask his question, and then we'll keep talking. George, go ahead and unmute yourself if you're still with us.
I am, and I wanted to thank you both. A lot of terrific clarity today. And, my wife, like many people here, grabbed the parachute and bailed out and living with her parents, aging, taking care of them. And she's back once a month for about a week because we have an 18-year-old daughter. And, our holiday season and so many things are uncertain right now. To be candid with you, Christmas and Thanksgiving are the least of my concern right now. The kids will have a good meal if they're here, and that's that. But how do you know when you've done those things that we talked about? I mean, I think I was a terrible self-sorcerer. I was very judgmental. I was very unaccepting. I was a big delegator. In the past, definitely was unnecessarily harsh and anxious over a lot of shit that just I shouldn't have been. And I know that I'm getting a passing grade in those categories that you talked about right now. If I were to give the grade myself, which I'm the only one that can do that, but I see through my grown children's reaction and even my wife's coming back gingerly, but I keep feeling like they're waiting for the shoe to drop and for it not to be real. And I know the change is real. I know the change is ongoing, and it will be for the rest of my life because I'm aware. I was never aware before. So my question is this. I try to seek no validation from them and try to find my own self-actualization, my own self-validation. How do I know that it's genuine and that I'm not just trying to, change for the sake of
I got a couple of things to say about that.
people happy?
Well, first of all, congratulations for doing all that work. That's great to have, in the middle of adversity and challenge like that, decided to pursue these things. George, nobody's going to get them perfect. I would say it's the rest of our lives we're learning to do these things. There's no destination, not on this side of the grave anyway. Like, I'm constantly finding new places I have to turn my attention to myself, to be a hero inwardly, to release judgment, to accept more deeply. So the question really is like, at what point do you know that you've done all you can do? How do you know it's genuine? There's a couple things I would look for. The first is if you overall feel like you're waiting, if life feels on pause, there's still room to grow. Because if my future feels uncertain until someone else changes, I've actually empowered them with my future in that unfair way, I would say, where like it's too much for her lean shoulders. She doesn't want to own my future. So we've had this talk a few times. One time we talked about this, like if we needed to divorce and I didn't want it, would you want me to go ahead and lead it? And you said yes. But if my entire life is on pause because I'm waiting for Zelda, then I'm actually looking to Zelda to lead me and my life and my happiness and my future. And that's too much pressure. So a simple test is, am I waiting? If I'm waiting, I'm delegating. It's really that simple. Anywhere you're waiting, you're not leading your life. Now, there is a kind of waiting that's just you're trying to look for wisdom for yourself. But if you feel like you're waiting until someone else has a change of some kind, you are not living in the hero role in your own life. You're living even if it's mild, in the victim role where you're waiting for your wife to be the hero who changes the story.
So,
That, go ahead.
I totally get that.
Okay.
And it leads to one very quick interjection.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know whether I feel like she's made up her mind to divorce, but she's not ready to pull the trigger for a variety of reasons.
Right.
And I don't know whether I should initiate it to give her her freedom and give myself the freedom, or whether I should just, as my deacon and my counselor say, just ride it out, man. Just ride it out and live your life and see
Yeah.
how.
It really, I can answer. I'll give you my perspective as a man, George, and I'd love to hear Zelda's as a woman. For me, it would depend on what do I want for my life. So it wouldn't be so much what does she want for the future of our marriage. It's what do I want. And if for right now, I don't have any clarity that I need to make a decision, I'm not going to make a decision because it's not actually hindering my day-to-day life. But let's just say I say, you know what? I've been having this hankering to move to Italy, and I'm not going to wait forever. Like, I want to move to Italy. I have no idea if this woman is on my team or not. So I set the date. I'm like, next September, I'm moving to Italy. And if you're not with me, you're not with me. So until you have a place where you have to make a decision as a man for what you want next. Notice it's your wife's not even a factor in that. Just like, what do you want for you?
What a great answer that brings me some sense of clarity, because I'm in my home, I'm in my master bedroom, my life is going great. I just miss the day-to-day companionship.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm in a big hurry to move to Italy or Zimbabwe right now.
Yeah. No, I got you. And until, usually what I tell clients is you have to get good at being present every day. Like, wake up tomorrow and ask yourself, what do I want today? And if one day that is, I don't want this anymore, that's, what you need to know, right? Like, that's the day you're like, hey, I'm moving to Zimbabwe or whatever. And you just have to get good at living every day that way, not living in the future, but living today. Sometimes we say, like, am I done with this? That's another question. Am I done? Have I gotten all I want to get out of waiting and being patient? And I find most men generally are ready to throw in the towel, sometimes a little too early. So one thing I have guys do, George, is you might have seen on Good Guys, Great Men, I wrote a newsletter series called The 4 Keys. So I have guys track 4 things in their life: ownership, self-reliance, brotherhood, and high regard, and make sure that they kind of just scale themselves between 1 and 10. And I like to them to do that for a few months to see how consistently they're self-reporting, doing in those areas. And if they're doing that really well for months and they don't feel like there's, reconciliation happening, then, that's a time to look a little deeper. It's kind of complex, meaning a lot of times guys are just waiting and they're also not initiating. And this is a complex thing maybe we could talk about for the few minutes we have left. Is women do this thing where she'll say, turn that light switch off. And I'll be like, well, I want it on. Well, turn it off, right? Let's just say this is intimacy and connection. She's like, so she turns it off. She says, don't touch that thing. There are times when a woman actually wants you to turn it on again, even though she told you to turn it off. But there are other times so you go to turn it on. She said, I told you not to turn that on again. And there's absolutely no rhyme or reason or consistency from a male's perspective. So most guys are like, she turned it off, she has to turn it on again. But what Zelda has told me before is, if you turn something off, like connection, intimacy, or even if you left the relationship, the way women are, you might actually want me to come and pursue, but then again, you might not. And this is the quandary men find ourselves in, is like, how do I know? How do I know if I should try to reconcile or pursue or reconnect? Because you told me you didn't want that. And men, we get really hung up on words. So maybe you could share some perspective about this.
I feel like that's there's a lot there. I mean,
There is, I could do maybe we'll do our next black drive on that.
Well, let me ask a direct question. It may help frame it for you, Zelda. You've been wonderful, by the way. Appreciate you on these. When you're told there's no chance of a reconciliation, is it healthy to say to yourself, I'm adding the two words right now or in the present? Not saying it to her, but saying it to myself.
For us,
Because
yeah.
I just feel like there's no hope for reconciliation right now.
mhm,
Yeah, in her mind, the die is cast. I know everything there is to know about you. You're never going to change, and all the other stuff every other man has heard on this Zoom.
mhm. I mean, I think so. Of course, I'm an eternal optimist, so I always think that there's hope. And I think that for me, that is proven because I never did leave. I never got in my car and drove away.
I'm a recovering pessimist.
And so I'm always, for all of our years of marriage, looking and hoping that things would get better. And I felt like there were always glimpses of times, like I'm always careful to say it wasn't like it was bad and dark for all those 20 years. There were always glimpses of times where it was good and beautiful. So I think that's completely fair to say there's no hope for reconciliation right now. I'm big on taking it one day at a time. I'm big on that for myself, having to self-talk myself that today, right now, I'm okay. And I'm big on telling that to my children, to take life one day at a time. And I think that anyone who's in a struggling marriage has to do the same thing, take it one day at a time. Like, just for today, this is where you are. Tomorrow and the next day, you don't know where you'll be. And
I think she said, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I think she said so many years of holding it in. We both were doing covert contracts, codependent, you name it, we were doing it all.
Yeah.
And now she's kind of showing her emancipation. I think she's very courageous. Memorial Day, she went away with another couple that we're friendly with that we might have gone with in the past. The other day, happened to be home and said, I'm going to dinner with my friend. I'll catch you later. And I think it's all healthy, and maybe we were unhealthy before, but I don't know if she can get past the fact that health is on the horizon and there is change in front of you if you're willing to look for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do think there's something, George, I have witnessing guys that have reconciled or are trying is a woman is pretty used to us making very, very temporal changes to try to momentarily improve a situation.
Mm-hmm.
It does take a considerable amount of time. If I had to put it on average, it's at least 6 to 9 months across hundreds of people, and a lot of times a lot longer from the time a man becomes consistent. And that's what's important, is we have to be consistent as men before I think our partners will actually even begin to look to see if it's trustable. Because if we look over our shoulders, or we kind of keep going back to the way we had been, every time they don't look interested, we're sitting there looping, where it's like, we're not really building any credibility. So consistency and reliability, I think, have to happen in a man for months. And then you have to be able to see, because it probably seems really vulnerable to try to put your trust in the relationship again. Because what are you worried about happening in that?
That it's just going to go back to normal, or even be even worse.
Right. Yeah.
But
Because
yeah, I
really,
agree with the time. That's why I say, like, if we were to talk about, if someone were to ask us, like, well, when was the turning point in your marriage, right? I can't say a specific date,
because it was like,
because there was, you had gone to Mexico with the good guys to great men guys. So I would say, if someone had to ask me what would the beginning of renewal in your marriage would be, I would point to that. But it was like, I can remember a sense of waiting or a sense of like, wondering.
And it's not like you hand trust over all at once. It's like, a man becomes a little bit more trustable and you're like, is that real? And you're looking at it and you move a little bit closer and I think each partner is kind of finding their new lane a
Mhm.
little bit.
Yeah.
And that does require a lot of patience.
Yeah,
I had
and time.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm working, or there's one guy in my community who's it's taken him about 3 years. He's doing great. It's just, it's just not a snap your fingers kind of thing.
Mm-mm.
I will say, if you think you want that, I would highly recommend you not start any other relationships, because that actually
Agreed.
derails that process considerably. And a lot of men get tired of a lack of companionship and they go on a few dates, or
Mm.
first they're intimate with a woman. And I would say that sets it back considerably.
Mhm.
And that's a whole other subject we could talk about. But yeah, I think patience and just giving her time to settle in. Like you mentioned, emancipation. I love that word, because that is, I think, a feeling that resonates with a woman who's been on the hook for something for so long.
Mhm.
So she's got to have the time to feel like she's in a wide pasture, right?
Mhm.
And then she's got to feel time to like just let that sink in and be relieved of the pressure. And then she's got to notice consistency and reliability. And then she's got to work through all the insides of like, what do I want? Right.
Yeah.
And is that what I want? And is it real? And is it going to abide? And meanwhile, George, we all have what I call mortality pressure. And especially in our 40s and 50s, we're like, you know what? The end is closer to than the beginning. And I'm afraid of being wrong, because this might be my last chance. This is like this internal thing men and women think, like, I got to find the love I've wanted my whole life, and I got to find it soon. And so there's that happening. And I think if you
Do you
empathize,
think that do you think that's real, or do you think that's just an affliction to be 59 or 58 and say to yourself, man, we got to get this right. These are supposed to be our golden years traveling together. Because I keep saying to myself, I don't give a shit. It's like, if it
yeah,
happens soon, fine. If not, there'll be somebody else.
I think it's an existential issue, meaning I think every human soul wants to be radically and deeply accepted for who
Hmm.
they are as they are. And I think if you haven't experienced or tasted that, you've had intimacy, but not deep acceptance, and really what I would call unconditional love, that is
Yeah.
going to torment you. And you're going to long for that. And you might have a hard time believing that the person you've been married to for 30 or 40 years is capable of that. That's kind of what
But,
everybody says. And that's both ways. Men
yeah,
are,
I was gonna say, unless you get introspective and say you weren't given it either.
yeah, that gets tricky. Now, Zelda didn't say this, and she had her journey, I had mine. I personally believe the healthiest scenario is for a man, if possible, to go first, right? She went first in self-acceptance. I would say I did my best to be the guy that went first in releasing judgment and acceptance. Not that she didn't. I just meant, like, it didn't matter to me if she was going to release judgment and acceptance of me. Like, my perspective was, I have to be this guy, come hell or high water. If she never responds to that, I don't care. It's about who
Hmm.
I want to be. And so going first in these three things for men, I think, provides the best possible runway for the relationship that a man wants to build. And if I distilled all the success cases I've seen down to these common denominators, they are these attitudes in a man, followed by those four key attributes, which you can find on my website if you want to go deeper in that. But
Thank you both very much.
appreciate the question, George. All right, well, we've reached our time. I want to share my screen real quick here and just invite you, just because it has a website on there, if you could see that. At the bottom, you'll see it says svenmasterson.com/hero. the talks I have with men face to face, one-on-one, are just like this. Notice we didn't make a sales pitch. There's no sales pitch on that website either. If you want to talk further about your situation and just get perspective, be heard, be understood, I would invite you to go to that website, svenmasterson.com/hero. You could set up a free call. I'm not going to try to peddle something to you. I don't have a book to sell you. What I'm going to do is just talk with you. And if you find it helpful, then I can explain how to go deeper into that idea of, radical self-acceptance, radical acceptance for your partner. Those 4 keys I talked about. And I would love to speak with you if that's you. And if not, and you just, enjoyed the call, I would love to hear from you. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what else we could talk about. We do these calls, every few months. And I would love to know what you'd love to hear from a couple who's living on the other side of this woefully difficult season. So svenmasterson.com/hero. You can also email me at svenmasterson.com, and I'd be happy to get to know you a little bit. So appreciate you being here with us today. You guys have been great.
Can I just add one more
Go ahead.
thing? Just to agree with what you said about the man going first, because
Okay. Good.
while I did go first as far as the self-acceptance as mentioned, and got to a point where I didn't feel I had to leave anymore, get in the car and drive away, and could find avenues for doing the next thing. Sorry, doing the next thing in life, and taking life a day at a time and finding fulfillment in things. It didn't change our marriage. Like, our marriage didn't have like a big turnaround until you found self-acceptance and all that you had to do.
Yeah.
And I think that I just wanted to kind of agree with you. That
Okay,
I think
that's
it's
good.
important because, men are the leaders. And that might be a completely cross or countercultural thing to say, but it's something that I firmly believe in. And I think that if you see it in action, you can agree.
Well, it's not, just to be clear, we don't mean when we say leader in charge,
No.
it's going first.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, both of us have a hard thing to do. For me to decide to do it first has beneficial consequences in our relationship. It's not that you can't do that on your own, but there is something to that, with the energy of like, hey, I'm going to go first. And it seems like for the feminine, it's easier to do your thing if I've already done mine.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's what I wanted to validate.
good. Okay.
What you said.
All right. Well, again, thanks for being with us. If you check my YouTube channel, the recording of this will be up there in a day or two. And again, thanks for being with us, guys. You guys have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
See you.